From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery.
Hello, this is Paul Bryson. I'm the Associate Professor of Otolaryngology and Director of the Cleveland Clinic Voice Center and Laryngology at the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm also the web editor for JAMA Oto. I'm pleased today to welcome Dr. Emily Boss, Professor of Otolaryngology and Pediatrics and Health Policy and Management at Johns Hopkins Medical Institution. Today we're going to talk about the unrealized potential of the Reg-ent ENT clinical database registry. Hello, Dr. Boss.
Hi, Dr. Bryson. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Oh, it's our pleasure. I wanted to congratulate you on this upcoming commentary and article. Before we get started with today's podcast, I wanted to give Dr. Boss the opportunity to talk about her relationship with the Academy, or lack of a formal one, with regards to this registry. So, Dr. Boss, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just say that I am certainly not speaking for the Academy of Otolaryngology in any way, and I know that there is so much work behind the scenes to try to make Reg-ent more user-friendly and more applicable to otolaryngology practice, and I don't know the nuances of that. My experience with Reg-ent has mostly been as an otolaryngologist serving as a liaison between our department and Reg-ent to try to make Reg-ent usable for our clinical practice in otolaryngology and understand how we might be able to use the dashboard that was provided. So I, with my team, was able to kind of oversee what are the exact measures that we can follow in our practice, what do the dashboards look like, what is involved in us validating the data. And we also had to, of course, speak to the cost and to explain to our department what the product was that we were receiving.
Could you give the listener just a little bit of background? What is the Reg-ent registry?
Sure, absolutely. Reg-ent is a specialty-specific qualified clinical data registry. And this was developed starting in 2016 by the American Academy of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Foundation. And it was really meant to address needs of specialty-specific quality measurement and reporting. And what Reg-ent does is it works with practice electronic health records to abstract really complex data from patient charts on patients of otolaryngologists and basically capture quality of care through defined measures. I'll add also that what Reg-ent does is it then produces a dashboard for any participating practices so that the practice can then follow kind of their care quality across some of these different measures and, for example, look at variability between different clinicians or types of patients.
The dashboarding and tracking capabilities sound pretty interesting. It's nice for practices to be able to, keep track and follow this. Is there any cost to participate in Reg-ent?
So Reg-ent charges per clinician participating, and really the clinicians themselves are not necessarily choosing to participate, but they're collecting data for all patients that are treated by specific practitioners. And so it's a cost per practitioner. I believe it's $295 per clinician, and that's an annual fee, and there's an initial sort of introductory fee per practitioner. And then also, once they've started to abstract data, there is a whole review of accuracy. So there's a little bit of time and resource intensive kind of chart and measure review to make sure that the data that's being collected and interpreted is accurate.
And, how is it currently being used? I have to admit, I'm a little embarrassed. I don't use this currently in my clinical practice. So I have a feeling I'm not alone. So, what are the things that are being collected currently and how's it being used?
Right. Well, I'll back up just to say that we wrote this commentary basically after having a lot of experience trying to make use of Reg-ent in our academic practice at Johns Hopkins. And we learned a lot about the registry and kind of some of the potential and hope for the future for use for otolaryngologists. But much of our experience was that we at least have been unable to use Reg-ent very effectively to inform our practice. So Reg-ent was developed first to respond to needs of otolaryngologists who report to MIPS, which is a CMS quality reporting program. So there are significant regulatory requirements for many different individual and group practices. And Reg-ent allows more functional and facile reporting for these practitioners who report to MIPS. And so I think that's probably where it has been the most effective and successful.
Oh, thanks for that background. What are some of the outcome measures that are frequently used?
Users of Reg-ent are able to measure quality across three different types of quality measures. So, first, there are specialty specific measures, and these are really where we have the most potential with otolaryngology. The Academy has put together clinical advisory councils to try to work on developing measures that may be useful for Reg-ent and getting these sort of approved across the board. There are nine specialty specific measures that are currently in use or allowed for use in Reg-ent. And these are mostly outpatient measures. These are mostly process-based measures. So things like use of ototopical drops for tube otorrhea as primary treatment is an example of one of the approved specialty-based measures. There are also surgical measures that have been licensed by the College of Surgeons. But unfortunately, and these actually could have great use in practice, and these relate to 30-day reoperation surgical site infections. But use is limited to a very small number of otolaryngology procedures, for example, thyroidectomy and parathyroidectomy. The measures are really licensed around general surgery-based procedures, and so we're not able to customize those to more broadly fit our specialty. And then finally, there are other CMS-based measures that are mostly directed at primary care physicians. So this is where we think about asthma management, blood pressure medication, and different types of screening that are certainly important for general practice, but less specific to otolaryngology care.
No, I appreciate that background. It seems like a real challenge sometimes, one, to identify the outcomes that are trackable and that matter. And then, one of the questions that it always pops into my head is like, what are the barriers to adoption? As this database has been around, did you uncover any barriers or any, I guess the practices that are sort of super users of the database, like, I guess, what are they doing well versus what do you think are the barriers to broader adoption?
Well, the biggest limitation that we found with Reg-ent, which I do hope will be improved in future iterations, and I do think the Academy is working hard on this, is that we're unable to customize measures that are significant to our practice and our local environment. So, for example, if we really want to be following kind of the dosage and amount of opioids that we're prescribing to children, or actually just after any otolaryngology procedure, right now, despite the vast array of information that is pushed out from the electronic health records to Reg-ent, we can't actually choose to measure that. We can only use those very focused measures that are provided and kind of licensed for use in the registry. So that's one of our biggest issues is we really want to be able to customize measures that are important, again, for barriers in our local practice. Another example would be looking at time to treatment for head and neck cancer patients or for patients with sensorineural hearing loss. We want to look at some of our systems barriers to try to improve our systems over time. And at the moment, at least, we're not able to customize measures for use in Reg-ent.
No, that's super helpful. Since we all kind of practice in certain subspecialty ways, that customization I can see as being something that people would want, right? Like everybody's practice, there's similarities, but they're not all the same.
Right. The other great improvement that Reg-ent hopefully will incorporate is really ability to look at patient outcomes. So many of the measures that are used are process measures, and they look at important aspects of appropriate use or overuse of care. And this is an area where other initiatives like Choosing Wisely, for example, focused. But right now with Reg-ent, we're not able to see how many patients have septal perforations after septoplasty and what method of septoplasty was used. So we're not able to know really the outcomes for the patients. And likewise, at least to my knowledge, we don't have ability to measure patient-reported outcomes, although I do think that that's a facet of the registry that is trying to be built out. I don't want to speak for the academy in that sense, but I think that more incorporation of both patient reported outcomes and actually being able to understand patient outcomes based on the quality of care and the method of care that we're providing is going to be really useful.
Yeah, it seems. I think it will be really useful, and it also seems like a complex process to try to get it, as right as you can, but maintain flexibility, right, and being able to have it change over time. Any influence from payers that you see? I know you mentioned CMS and things like that, or do they have a seat at the table, or is it mostly, through our academy?
I truly don't know. I mean, I think that the academy, and I actually am really speaking from my own experience as an otolaryngologist at Johns Hopkins who is asked to try to figure out Regent usability in our practice. So I can't speak for the academy, but I don't know how much the payers are able to influence or impress on us the quality of care that we should be measuring, or if they're looking particularly for any patterns of use. I do know that Regent is going to try to incorporate ability for practices to participate in clinical trials, which may have some important monetary value for practices. But again, I can't necessarily comment on what's happening with Regent over at the Academy. I can more comment on our view of usability in its current state.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in your practice you capture your data and outcomes data. How does it seem to interact with your regular sort of operations with your patient care?
It doesn't actually. So that was our biggest issue, was that right now the measures that are available for use are easily achieved. So again, like if I think about myself as a pediatric otolaryngologist, thinking about use of ototopicals for tube related otorrhea as appropriate treatment. I do want to know if I'm not doing that or if my partners aren't, but I think that those measures have been developed basically so that they can be, easily achieved and then also reported to CMS if that's what's necessary. But I'd love to actually know about pain control or need for pain control, for example, after intracapsular tonsillectomy, particularly in young children. And that's something that I can't get right now the way that Regent is configured.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it adapts over time because I think, at least what I think I'm hearing, is that you definitely know certain elements in your practice that would be interesting to know and would, maybe influence practices and treatment patterns. But in its current iteration, it's not quite able to, it can't be nimbly configured to track what you would otherwise want to track.
Right. And we also found that there was still a fair amount of manual labor involved in needing to review kind of the quality of the data that was being provided and making sure that the interpretation of the free text notes was accurate in capturing the correct data. And so it was sort of ended up being the work and cost just balanced with the product that we were receiving at this point doesn't add up.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's important information, right? As we talk about usability and adaptation.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that if Regent is able to work with practices to better customize measures, then it can be really successful. I think if we can expand the availability of otolaryngology, specialty specific measures to be more diverse and also evaluate patient outcomes, Regent is going to hit the mark. And then the other thing, and I'm selfishly really interested in Regent for use in health services research. I think it could be an amazing tool for not just my own team, but for any of our faculty or trainees in our academic practice to use. And at the moment, I know that they're working with a vendor to create a product so that Regent data could be used in research, but it's just, it's not up and running yet in the way that we could freely use it. I guess an analogy would be the NISQIP public use file. That's a great example of an area where we can access this public use file and use it to understand some important quality of care.
No, I appreciate it. Those are excellent points. I really appreciate your time and coming onto the podcast today to share your expertise with the listeners. Any additional take home points before we wrap up?
No take-home points, just to say that I'm really optimistic about the use of the specialty-specific data registry in measuring quality of care and improving patient outcomes in otolaryngology. This is sincere. I just hope that we can figure out more usability for this registry beyond regulatory reporting to really meet the needs of practices across universities and health systems, individual, small, and large group practices.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
I'm Paul Bryson, and I've been speaking with Dr. Emily Boss about the unrealized potential of the Reg-ent ENT Clinical Data Registry. You can find a link to the paper in this episode's description. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by Daniel Morrow at the JAMA Network. Thanks for listening.